Hey everyone, this is Dave with Valor Fire Training. Thanks for joining us for our next episode of Valor Fire Training's Q&A, the quarantine edition. So I'm hanging out here with Marc Aloan from the Fire Inside. He's also over at West Columbia Fire. And we had an interesting conversation on Facebook the other day about realism in fire training. And one of the things that kind of came up was, keeping things realistic and the risk that we run by not keeping it realistic. And it kind of plays into a question that we received from a guy named Frank, and he wanted to know how do we kind of view the realism in training as far as live fire? And as we've progressed more and more into propane or gas-fed fires, what does that do to our firefighters that are coming up in the fire service? So it kind of hit spot on. Marc, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I kind of figured I'd pose that question to you and kind of let you take off and see where we end up.
Well, cool. Well, first, like I said, thank you for having me. I'm probably not the most qualified instructor in the planet to be fielding these questions, but I think it's cool to sit down and talk about stuff like this. And it's ironic too that I even commented because I usually steer away from questions like this on Facebook, but it led to a good sidebar there. And I think the problem is just that money's tight for most places, right? The government is not as wealthy as it used to be in many places, so. What's the first thing you cut, right? The irony of everything. We cut prevention, we cut training. The two things that probably have the biggest impact on our ability to, carry out our mission, and we're going to knock them out, first things first, because operations has to go on. So I kind of came in the fire service around 2001, which was kind of in that weird time where we were starting to get away from the older training models. And as a matter of fact, I started in upstate New York, and one of the videos a lot of people watch in their basic fire training and also like in their basic instructor courses was a department not far from us that had a 55-gallon drum of, I can't even remember what, I think it was kerosene, and they put a road flare in it, and the whole building basically blew up, right? And everybody's seen this video. So that was kind of what I watched, in my initial training. So I understand why people kind of take a step back with training, and safety has to come first, right? How do you put somebody in a box, and explain to their wife or their mom or their dad, brother, sister, whatever, that, hey, our bad, we were trying to train, and your loved one was fatally injured. That's just not acceptable. But in the same breath, if you look at the military, and we're paramilitary, so it lines up to a degree. People die in training sometimes, and while it's tragic and it's not the goal, right? If you're going to be ready for combat, like at some point you got to use live ammo, at some point you got to jump out of a helicopter, you got to run tanks, all this stuff the military does. So to me, we're kind of in the same boat. I think maybe we've gone a little too far the other way, right? And I think as technology has evolved, we found ways to not only make training more convenient for us, right, but to make it safer at the same time, and we all kind of bought into that. But to lead into the question, with the realism aspect of it, I've heard stories from people that have had students that are going in and doing the penciling that we used to teach in they did 3 short bursts in a real fire, and they sat there and the fire's still burning, right? But every time that they have opened that nozzle in their career, it's either been in a parking lot or they were told, like, hey, if you drown this thing out, we're not going to have any more fire for the rest of the class, so use your water sparingly, right? Well, I understand that. I've instructed enough to understand that, hey, if you screw that fire up early, it's done for the day, right? You're going to spend half the day trying to get it relit. And if you got 20 students and student number 2 does it, how does that go? So, I don't think the answer is simple. Obviously, I think we're too far the other way. And, kind of like I teach in a lot of my classes, the fire service loves being here when we need to be here in the middle, right? We love to be hyper realism. We should be, let's just go into houses and light them on fire, not prep them at all. And then the other half is, oh no, we need to be in simulators with fake water and fake fire. And obviously the answer is in the middle. And, I think that Class A needs to be the standard, because at the end of the day, we fight Class A fires. We're going into buildings, they have contents, they have structure, it burns. The Class B buildings, though, I think have a place, right? And I've fought fire in both in training environments. And I think the nice thing about the Class B is that it's very easy to clean up, it's very easy to reset, and it's very efficient. So if you're trying to just teach technique only, and I'm not talking about conditions or reading fire, reading smoke, or, the thermal balance. If you're just trying to teach people how to crawl a hallway, give them something better than a flashlight or a traffic cone to aim their pattern at, a Class B building is good for that. You get a lot of reps in quick. I think it has to come with the explanation of, obviously we're missing half of the conditions here. Take it for what it's worth. We have to teach our people to be smart enough to recognize these things. But now I can flow on that fire without having to 3-short burst it, to preserve it because there's a guy with a button. Now that's the downside of it. I can do the most perfect technique. And if, John's over here texting on his phone with the button and misses it,
right.
Well, my perfect technique went on for 5 minutes because John wasn't paying attention. So, technology has its limitations. But, yeah, I think it has a place for that. Like I said, a way to get a lot of people through either quickly or a lot of reps for people without a lot of cleanup. And obviously we don't have the same problem with, the byproducts of combustion with getting our gear filthy and all that. So I do think that's advantageous to some degree. However, at some point we got to fight real fires. And, pallets are good, right? I've been, in enough fires with pallets to know if you have somebody who knows what they're doing, they can get a good fire going with some pallets without wrecking the building, without burning everybody. But kind of like me and you were talking too, I think at some point we need to be able to introduce the materials that we're so kind of hesitant about. And I get the hazmat aspect, I get the health aspect, but you can't make the right smoke with a pallet. With a 100% wooden pallet with nothing on it. You can't do it. You can do decent smoke with, straw in a barrel.
Sure.
But it's not the smoke that comes from, the hydrocarbons. It's not the smoke that we're going to experience in the building. So kind of, and I'll swing it back to you here, kind of the open-ended question I left to you the other night was, have we not come far enough in our knowledge of hazmat, of firefighter health and safety, of air monitoring, of these materials where we can look at it from a perspective like industry does, which is you have a time-weighted average for these materials. You can have so much exposure. And honestly, our gear is so good anymore. I mean, how much exposure should we have? You're on air, you have gear on, you're wearing it correctly. As soon as you exit, you're getting gross decon, because we know that now. And so maybe it's not about, like it used to be, we didn't understand that. We just knew people were getting sick. Now we understand all this. So put the measures in place. You go in, you do your fire attack, you come out, you have the decon line. You set it up far enough away so the smoke doesn't shift and blow on the pump operator, whatever it may be. But, can't we get to a point where that becomes realistic again, where we can start, some places are allowed to do it, but I know most aren't, but get into these acquired structure burns, real stuff, real houses, at least maybe like, hey, you're allowed to do 1 of these a year or 2 of these a year, and we're going to track the exposure and all that and stuff. So maybe that's the way forward. I don't know. And like I said, I'm not big active in live fire training, right? I've been through it. I'm an instructor, but I don't want to send the wrong message there. But from the outside looking in, the company officer that tries to do training, the student that wishes they had more training, I think maybe it's time we realize that, less is more sometimes, but sometimes it's not. So, Class B we thought was the answer. It's probably not. And Class A has its dangers, but we're in the business of mitigating. So at what point do we just start mitigating these hazards and allowing us, because I can tell you from my standpoint, as somebody that probably hasn't had enough live fire training in their career, that came on in a time where fires, occur, but not at the rate they used to when on the job training was the main focus, is that it does cause some timidness and not out of fear or a lack of knowledge, but just, you're trying to get those wheels to turn of, okay, there's, the fire blowing out the window thing, right? We all are educated to know that means it's self-vented, right? It's probably a good thing. I know where it's at, right? But it's still, if you don't do it a lot, oh no. So same thing, you get in a hallway, it's dark. Okay, let me think back. What does this tell me now? Let me use all my spidey senses. Well, guess what? They're not honed, because every fire I've been to training, I know where the fire is because it's a familiar building. I crawl straight to it. I do my burst, and everybody tells me, yay, your Z pattern was so amazing. And you go outside and have a Gatorade and a high five, and you go about it. So sure. It does have an impact on the fire ground. So yeah, to flip it back to you, maybe that's the answer. Maybe we need to get to that point where it's an industrial perspective versus a safety perspective. And industry is good at safety, right? So perhaps we can look to them for the answers.
Well, and I think you brought up a couple of key points, and I probably already forgot half of them, but you brought up a couple of things that made my spidey senses go up. So the first one that I wanted to address, you brought up the correlation between our training and the law enforcement and military. And I just recently went through a tactical EMS class and became a tactical medic, which pretty much just makes me the guy that doesn't carry a gun, and I get to go hang out with a bunch of other people that have guns. So that's pretty much where I'm at with that one. But during that course, we actually had to go get exposed to CS gas. And so they shot a 40 mic into a canister, and we had to go into this Connex box, and we had to put on tourniquets and do some other skills, and then we had to take our mask off. And that was horrible. Like it was absolutely, like I had snot running out of my nose, my eyes were watering. It was just the worst feeling I've ever had in my entire life. And so one of the things that I've talked about in the past is that correlation between how law enforcement and military trains. And, you know, when I got into the fire service, as dumb as this sounds, and I've talked about it before on some of these talks, when I got into the fire service, we had an instructor who took straw and put it into a burn barrel and hit it with a hose line, so it made that nasty, chunky, filtery smoke. And he made us take our masks off and take a big gulp of it. And it sucked, and it was horrible. And I coughed and I threw up, and I never wanted to take my mask off. Now, hindsight being 2020, it's like being around a campfire. You know, it wasn't a couch or a tire, but it was enough to make me realize that it's hot, it's humid, it makes you not be able to catch your breath, and it makes you throw up, and your eyes water. And so I never wanted to do that ever again. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of people in the fire service that don't really understand how critical that face seal is. They don't understand how critical it is that when you run out of air, your natural instinct is going to be to rip that mask off. You know, and so air management becomes an issue. You know, people go, my low air alarm's going off, I can get out, it's no big deal. Malfunctions. You know, I've talked to so many people that talk about SCBAs and all this stuff, and I go, okay, cool. So your regulator stops working. What are you going to do? Oh yeah, I got to turn that thing. Okay, wait a minute. You just, without any outside stimuli, you just sat here for like 8 seconds and had to figure out to turn your bypass valve on. What are you going to do if that really happens in a real fire? You know, and so I agree. And, you know, that's one of the things that I've always kind of toyed around with. I mean, I probably wouldn't get instructor of the year for it, but I'd love to be able to put some people into a fire, you know, fake fire with some CS gas, and just wait for that one dude that's like pops off his regulator, or, you know, that one girl that's going down the hallway that doesn't have a good face seal. They're going to figure it out real quick. So that was the first point. The other point is the Class B kind of conundrum. And we were just down at Lake of the Ozarks for the Revolutionary Fire Tactics at the lake. And we were lucky enough to play around with the, I think it's Lion now. They've been bought out a couple times. It used to be Bolex, but they had that digital fire panel. Mm-hmm. And so it was really cool because it actually incorporated the smoke machine with the fire panel, and it reacts when you hit it with water. And so you can set the difficulty, you can set if it's what type of fire it is. And I think you can even hook multiple panels together. And so for that, it's like, man, we were running that through our scenarios, and it gave the crews something to actually focus on to do those skills repetitions. You know, hey, when you go inside, you're going to find the fire, blah, 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 blah. As soon as they got done with that evolution, we drained it and moved it to the other side of the room. So everybody that came in after that went to the right, and then they realized that the fire wasn't over there. It's off to their left now. So now they have to move. And it was cool to watch their minds kind of working like, oh yeah, we know where the fire is this time. We were moving around chairs, couches, you know, fake prop stuff. But we tried to get it to be where it wasn't going to be the same thing over and over and over again. And then lastly, what you were talking about with the hazard mitigation, I guess, you know, we were just up in Nebraska teaching a live fire class. And one of the things that we incorporated a while back was, for our instructors who are going to be going in and doing live fire on a pretty regular basis, we have the filtering hoods, right? And I'm going to stay away from name brand stuff, but we have the filtering hoods. I would love to get, you know, some gear that has the new particulate blocking wristlets and waistband and all that to try and keep our exposure down. And so I love your idea of, hey, you know, like, listen, if it's one crew and they're going out there for their annual live fire, have them decon the way that everybody else does. If it's an instructor on the instructor staff or somebody who you know is going to be instructing a lot, get them a set of that gear and get them the stuff that's going to protect them, because they have a higher level of exposure than everybody else in that area. But yeah, I agree that, you know, when we talk about, and I think what kind of kicked off our conversation on social media was that Virginia had banned back in July the use of OSB. And I use OSB a lot in our live fire training because I can burn it and get a lower temperature and still get the same effects. I get the streamers, I get rollover. I've had strips of OSB going down a hallway with chains, and we can actually have, I call it an analog fire blast. You know, you got fire rolling down the hallway, and as soon as they go up and start hitting the fire, it pushes all the gas and all the heat away from them. And it's easy to reset. Once you get it reset, you get the heat built back up, it pops off again. And so, you know, if we go a lot of places where they tell us that we can't burn OSB, and we're fine with that. We'll burn pellets. But historically, what I've found is that when we burn pellets, you get a ton more heat, very high heat, very low smoke. And the thermal product just isn't the same. I mean, when you're sitting there hitting the fire, you're creating steam, and you can see the string turning into steam, but there's no smoke. So it's just like poof, there's all this steam, and you're like, wait a minute, where the hell did that come from? And I guess from an educational standpoint, they get to see how the steam conversion works, but you're not seeing how it's churning up the thermal layer and how it's dropping that heat down on you. Whereas with the OSB, and you get that darker smoke, as soon as they hit it, you can see that thermal layer drop. And so visually, I think there's a lot of things that can be learned from that. So.
Well, and with the pallets are funny too, because, you know, unless like pallets were cool because they were readily available and cheap,
right,
and free in most cases, until we figured out that they're storing chemicals and flammables on them. So now people are literally buying fresh made, never used pallets out of their training budgets, which defeated the entire purpose of using pallets, right? So it's kind of a conundrum, right? It goes back and forth. Yeah, I like what you said about the simulator thing, you know, you know, technology is a funny thing, right? We can laugh at it, right? Like I was the first one, we got the first, the fire extinguisher props, right? For the light person, right? You know, it's like what was that thing we were growing up, the light bright or whatever, right? That's what it looks like to me. It's a light bright for fire extinguishers. But I think that maybe the issue is that we kind of use them backwards almost, right? Like use those things for the experienced people that have already had that initial training, that have that ability to realize like, this is not my muscle, you know, it's a muscle memory thing, but I got some help. What's up, baby? Yes, I give up for that. Yay. Your sister couldn't help you, dude?
No, she said hold on, but I don't want her to play.
All right, well, go see if she can help you, because I can't find it, okay? Oh, wait, here we go. All right, there you go. Quarantine edition.
That is the truest quarantine edition
Yeah.
I think I've ever had. Like that is,
I knew it was going to happen. It was bound to happen. So usually it's my wife walking down the stairs, and she gets mad because she doesn't know that camera's on. So,
bro, if it makes you feel any better, I can hear my wife screaming at my kids, "Your dad's on a video chat. Quit screaming at each other." So,
yeah. And then they find out you say it, and she'll be like, "I can't believe you recorded." Anyway, before I get myself any more trouble, but yeah, right. So it looks like a light bright, and you laugh at it, but I think at some point you have to realize that when you have that foundational level, right, and you need to go through the movements. So how convenient is it where I can go put that thing in the fire station, right, with some kind of prop hose where I still got to move it. And like you said, we can move it around. Now we got bends, we got kinks, we got all that stuff. So, you know, there's a time and a place for this stuff, but I think we do it the opposite way out of convenience. Well, we've got 30 students, so we can't clean up, so we're going to use it for that. Well, that's a bad habit to be teaching off the rip, you know, because they don't experience the smoke, they don't experience the fire coming back if they don't extinguish it all, right? They don't have the rollover, right? Their flashover, they don't get fire behind them. All these things, right, that we used to have people watching that we never had a clue they were watching for, right? You don't appreciate the instructors till you're at the other side of it. So yeah, kind of funny there that, you know, I think it's a tool, right? It's just like everything else. It's a tool. It's not the answer. It has a time. It has a place. And like you said, here you are at an awesome conference, and you're using it effectively, and people will probably laugh at you, but everybody knew what it was for, and it allowed you to screw up the next group, because what do firemen do when they leave? Oh, go in, second door on the right, back in the corner. You're good. The victim's there too. They come in, and it's like, there is no right. What do I do?
Well, and you know, it's crazy, because the reason why, and Dave Woodward, who runs the conference, he was very cool about the logistical side of things. Like he when we called him and said, hey, this is what we need for props, this is what our plan is, this is how we're going to teach a class, that weekend I think the heat index was like 104. And so I mean, it's down at the lake, it's humid, and we knew that people were going to be dropping like flies. And so to be able to do live fire, which we had the option to do, it wasn't going to work because you're only going to get 2 or 3 evolutions and then your students are going to be spent. And so this gave us the option to put them into somewhat realistic situations, because it was actually a firefighter survival class, but we had them functioning off of regular operations. So we had like an engine crew, a truck crew, and a rescue crew. They were going in and doing a search, and then we had a firefighter go down with like a diabetic reaction. So we
That's cool.
so like we made them go in and do real life situations and then incorporated the RIT stuff into it. And so it did give us the ability to extend out those simulations and those evolutions well beyond what we would have been able to do with live fire. But one of the things I wanted to touch on real quick, because you mentioned it too, is like the virtual reality stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the first time I saw that virtual reality stuff, I was like, all right, I don't know how I feel about that, but okay, let's look into it. And I've talked about it in a couple of classes. I agree with it. Like, I actually like the concept. And the reason why is because I can sit there and I can take the virtual reality environment. Man, I could have an airplane crash into a diesel semi truck that crashes into a Walmart, and I got people running around in the parking lot on fire and all sorts of stuff that you would never be able to recreate it on a training ground, right? So like visually and mentally, I can expose someone to that and have them start making tactical decisions like, okay, what do I need to do first? Do I need to address the airplane, the gas tanker, or the Walmart?
Mm-hmm.
And so because of graphics and where they are today, you can make that super, super high fidelity. But what scares me is that I see these people that are like, oh yeah, you don't even have to pull your fire truck out to do live fire training anymore. You can do it with virtual reality. And I'm like, wait a second, that's not the same.
So the driving simulator is the same way, right? Like, I've done one of those, right? And that's cool because it kind of gives you a way to judge your stopping distance without running into a telephone pole.
Sure.
But you would never take a brand new driver and stick them in a training simulator. You know, it's the same as pilots, right? Where do they start? They do a lot of work in simulators, but at some point they got to go figure out how to take the aircraft off and land it. They don't just say, well, you did good in this thing, so good luck. You know, we hope your first run is successful, right? They go out with a trainer who can take over the controls and all that. It's the same thing with the fire truck. So, yeah, I actually made fun of one of those things, I think, early on in one of my pages. And not because of the VR, but because they had, like, some, like, hose prop that went with it that was, like, a little pigtail. And I'm just like, can you see a bunch of us run around the station with these little makeshift – you know, but hey, joke's on me, right? Because what do we teach you now? Hey, get a pool noodle and practice your hose, right? You know, I'm learning more and more, like, be careful what you knock, because in 3 or 4 years, you're going to be like, so it's like politics, right? Like, so I was stupid back then, and now I've learned, and, you know, whatever. So, you know, I think if you could take that technology and pair it with real world tools, right? Like, I don't know, it seems scary. You'd have to lock them in a room or something. You can't run around the parking lot, but, you know, if you could have a live hose line, you know, it's somewhere to flow it, right? And, you know, some tools where you could, you know, simulate what you were doing. I think that's not a bad thing. But again, it's a tool. You still got to burn something now and again. And, you know, kind of get back to where we started is that, you know, back into the Class A fires too, is that, you know, the Class A fire is good in a burn building, but, you know, I truly believe, you know, acquired structures being the norm has to come back. Yeah. And, you know, I was fortunate enough to do one, I think, when I first started a career, and it was in a different county, and I think it was kind of the end. And it's so hard with the EPA anymore, which baffles me, because, you know, we burn houses, like, when they catch on fire, it's okay, but we can't burn one, you know, normally without, yeah. Come on. I mean, how much stuff goes down the drain in a Walmart parking lot from leaky vehicles, but we want to burn a house, which, you know, how do we used to get rid of trash back in the day? I know, like, the school I went to growing up in the north, they burned the trash for heat, right? Like, I mean, we had an incinerator. So kind of comical to me, but, you know, the EPA in a lot of states won't let you do it. But, you know, again, how safe are we being? You know, the truck out there is probably putting off more crap than the house is going to. But you couldn't beat that training, and not even because of, you know, I'm not even suggesting lighting the house off and putting people into it. I mean, we were still doing, you know, pallets within a room, but the conditions were different. But just for the non-monotonous, you know, down the Connex box to the right, and to have something besides metal or tile or concrete under you, have rugs, have linoleum, hardwood floors, all these things that, again, stuff like that. Like, I do a lot of training in the grass now because it's the closest thing I can get to carpet. You know, I'm thinking about going to like Lowe's or something and buying a big chunk of, you know, that outdoor carpeting just to throw down the base, so we can practice, you know, without tearing our pants up. And it's got that friction to it. So, if you want to get down to that level, like little things like that, you can't replace. So, back to my earlier statement, if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, if we're wearing our gear appropriately, if we're decontaminating appropriately, if we're monitoring the air to ensure that the people who aren't participating are not in the hot zone as far as the exposure goes, how are we getting exposed? And, I understand that people get sick from this job, right? I worry about it like everybody else does. But again, like the cancer rates, I don't know how to quantify this, and I'm sure somebody will watch this and say I need to study more, which is probably absolutely true. But, have we gotten to the point where we've looked at rates since improvements in PPE? Because, way back then, I wasn't around for this time, but what do the old school guys tell you, right? You didn't get in front of the nozzle because that's where the fresh air was. If you were searching, why was it so important to find a window? It wasn't to bail out. It was so you could get a breath of freaking air, right? So, back then they knew that they couldn't get exposed either. The problem was without the air pack, when conditions shifted, they didn't have a choice, right? So now that we've had all this stuff on, it's not that we're not safe. It's usually that people aren't wearing it correctly, or they're not washing it like they're being told to, right? Or they're not deconning when they get out, we'll do when we get back, so those kind of things. And then the other thing that I laugh about that I've talked about in my classes is that, we want to associate the structure fires in the trainings with all these cancers, but how many of these places are going to tell you that they can't do a live burn acquired structure Class A building because of cancer, but you go back to their station, they have no diesel exhaust system, right? They're smoking cigarettes, they're dipping, and I used to smoke, I used to dip. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying, you can't have it on this side and not on the other. And to kind of put personal story on that, I remember coming home one time and complaining to my wife that, somebody had gone to a fire and stuck their head in the building before and she got there with no air pack on and, it was like kitchen fire or something, dealt with it. I'm like, we're preaching cancer and blah, 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 blah. And she's like, it's funny you should say that with that giant wad of chew in your mouth, and I'm just like,
dude, you got called out.
Touche, ma'am, touche, and that was why I quit dipping, because she said that I was, I can't walk around saying this stuff. So, and, I went to FRI one year and I got talking to the Plymouth guy. The guy said, hey, well, what do you use right now, for your exhaust removal? And I said, well, we don't have anything. He goes, oh, so your lungs, good to know. And I'm just like, man, to put in perspective, right? So, I'm not trying to call anybody out or anything, but I think if you want to have these conversations about exposure and cancer and risk and all that crap, don't blame the live fire when you have all these other preventable things that we don't do because they're hard conversations and they cost money, right? They take maintenance and they're not what people want to hear and they require accountability. And, you can have the hoses hanging, but how many stations have you been to where the hoses are hanging in the bay and there's nobody hooks them up and everyone's
nobody
like,
hooks it up to anything.
Oh, who cares? Well, those things suck. Yeah, that's their job. They suck the exhaust out of the building for you, So, that's another rabbit hole to go down. There's so many facets of this and unfortunately they're all getting more expensive. So,
yeah.
But, even get down to gear, right? Oh, well, we can't do live fire because the guys, their gear will be nasty. Well, why can we have a law that outlaws, using OSB, but there's no law that says you have to have 2 sets of gear for your safety?
Right.
Again, tomato, low-hanging fruit, whatever you want to call it. So, I don't know. I think we're very hypocritical sometimes about how we latch onto these ideas and, this is so wrong and we can't have it anymore, but you have all these other issues over here and we're just like, don't worry about those. Right? Not today.
Well, and I think too, like, okay, so to bring it back kind of to Frank's question, as far as like what we feel about the realistic, like we totally forgot about Frank.
Rabbit hole. Sorry, Frank.
Question.
So we got new questions.
But no, I mean, I think that, as we've progressed into these gas-fueled fires and we've started to transition into safer, and there's nothing wrong with that, fires, we've kind of lost the edge of when you're crawling down a hallway and it's dark and it's thick and it's really, really hot, being able to determine like, hey, my knees are starting to get really hot. What does that mean to us? Well, you and I that have been around for a while, the fire's probably underneath us. Mm-hmm. Whereas other students haven't been there. I think one of the things that I brought up in a class one time and everybody's eyes just got really big is we've had quite a few firefighters over the years who have done the live fire training in gas fueled fires, which has that leaking gas propane sound. Mm-hmm. But then we go to like 60 by 40 Morton buildings and they hear that sound and they're like, oh, the fire's over there. No, dumbass, that's a bottle that's off-gassing that's about to explode. And luckily we haven't had anybody get killed, but there's a lot of people who have died that And so for them not to realize that it's not crackling, that's not the sound you're hearing. It's a propane bottle or acetylene bottle or an oxygen bottle, or it could just be a compressor tank that the hose burned off. But that sounds not okay. But they don't realize that because that's the only sound that they've heard for the last 6 months during their Fire 1 class as they listen to that propane, fire blast system.
Yep.
So I feel like in a roundabout way, I feel like as we've moved to being safer firefighters, we've also lost the edge of learning our trade and doing it well. And it's because of the training, specifically about fire attack and ventilation and search and things like that in a fire that's inside of a building. I feel like we've lost that edge.
Yeah, and I think what you said too is, something we need to think about, that, being averse to something does not make you safe. I would argue the other side, that being averse to all these realistic conditions makes us more unsafe, because now we are putting people in these situations when it really matters. Right. And they don't have the training that they thought they had, right? And again, I'll throw myself under the bus. I have been to those calls where, hey, I know what I'm going to do because of my training. And then when I get there, I look back on the incident and I'm like, what happened?
Yeah.
You
that
came
didn't
with
go
this,
at all like it was supposed to.
I had this amazing plan, and the parking brake hit, and I just went stupid, And what does Aaron Field say, right? You go lizard brain, and it's so true. The problem is our lizard brains are getting lazy, So I remember early on in my early, still Class A training, not Class B, but even Class A fires that were down to 1 or 2 pallets or something ridiculously ineffective. But duck walking into the building, being told that I had to get down, and I'm not hot. Well, you need to learn to get down. Well, so what do we have? We have people that are walking in to nothing showing, right? Yeah. No smoke, no heat, and they're on the ground because they've been yelled at their entire training, right? And nobody has told them that's wrong, or even worse, the officer was told that. So was the senior guy, because we're getting younger. And so everybody's in here doing this little duckling crawl through the foyer, and there's like, the homeowner walks in looking at him, right? It's like, I forgot my wallet in here, and they just walk back out. It's like,
oh yeah, no, and that's, and like we laugh about it, but I mean that's a real thing. I mean,
it's not funny, but I mean you have to laugh about it at some point. So and even I think back to how many times trying to compensate for that, the old, well, turn your hood around backwards, right? Well, we all know if you do it a certain way, you can still see underneath it, right? And I just got one of those. I won't give a brand, but one of those resin shields for my mask, right? And that thing will black you out. And they make training ones, and they also have, I know Scott makes them for their mask specifically, but a lot of companies make kind of the filters to where it's not blacked out, but you can't see it. To me, that's even more effective in a lot of ways, if you can turn out the lights just to have that haziness to it, right? And there's a time for blacked out stuff. There's plenty of times you can't see, but what about times where you think you can see, and how misleading that is, right? So, if we can't fix the live fire situation, I think we have to be a little more ingenious about the way we try to adapt. And that's a personal mandate in a lot of ways, right? And, not to get off for the realism thing too, but, I think we're looking at a time in the fire service too, where that responsibility is kind of shifted to the individual. The days of waiting for your department to come give it to you are kind of over.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into the politics of that because I'm not a fire chief and I never have been, and I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into it than what we see from the floor, right? So I will afford the respect to the decision makers that I don't know the whole story, but you got to understand too, as a company officer and as a chief officer, that the majority of people are not going to go get it on their own, right? You're squared away, guys are, and good for them, but you can't expect somebody to spend how much money and their time off and whatever else to go out to these classes and get these training, right? I wish we could all go see, Jim McCormack at FDTN and all go through, Disneyland together.
You and me both, man. We could road trip.
Oh yeah, but the logistics alone, right? It's not possible, right? And we're fortunate that there's enough awesome people putting on these good conferences across the country where, like, you could throw a rock and hit a fire conference right now, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's realistic, right? It's realistic training. Some of the best training I've got has been going to those things, right? I'm wearing a shirt right now, MAFC, right? Metro Atlanta Firefighter Conference, probably one of the best on the planet. It's cheap, right? But a bunch of squared away dudes that are probably not making any money off this thing, but they want to give realistic quality training. I took a class there, and it was 2 or 3 years ago now, so probably about a decade into my fire service career, a little bit more. And it was the first time I had ever been in a live fire in a training environment where we ran multiple evolutions at once, where you had a rescue team with an attack team with a VES team.
Yep.
And the whole point of it was you don't realize how you start running into each other, right? And if you haven't been to a lot of fires and if you haven't done it in training, you don't know. So, just little things like that we overlook a lot of the time, just it's out there. But I think people need to understand it. If you want realistic training, you're probably going to have to go get it. And now you have that kind of responsibility to bring it back and try to share it the best you can with the people that either can't afford to or don't want to go get it, and think the department's going to give it to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think somebody else posted, Andrew Snodgrass from up in the south, northwest, bearings. He's up north.
Yeah.
But he posted on there, he said, do you feel like the pendulum is going to swing the other way? And I really, truly do. Like, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see that pendulum start swinging back the other way. I know specifically in my area, even within one of my departments, like we're starting to build our own training tower. We don't have the funds to buy one. We don't have the funds to finance a multi-million-dollar training center. But what we can do is start incrementally and in phases, start building a Connex building that's going to have multiple floors. It'll have, roof prop. It'll have a bunch of different stuff that we can use so that we can get that live fire experience back.
And what's wrong with that, though? I mean, that's what the fire service is born on. And again, it's kind of like a lot of things. We let these salesmen come in, many of which were firefighters trying to make a buck. But, I've been in $1 million Class B burn building. It doesn't hold a candle to the single Connex box with a pallet, right? Like I would rather go in that single Connex box knowing it's a straight hallway, but it's still better to me than this $1 million building. And then how much money you got to pay for gas on top of it and maintenance, and you got to have it recertified and hydroed. And, I just miss the days of very simple concrete buildings, right? And you rotated the fires around so you didn't spoil the concrete, right? And they got inspected. And, I think the other thing that hurts us, especially with training, is just kind of, how can you be realistic when there's no budget to keep it up, right? So, we just think everything's going to last forever in the fire service, from a vacuum cleaner to a fire truck to a burn building, and so if you're burn building.
Unless it goes to the truck company and then that they're going to break it.
Well, yeah, but I can't give them the burn. Well, we could make them break the burn build. I don't know. So, but yeah, how can you be realistic, especially when your training materials are, oh, well, this is the fog nozzle from 1964 that we didn't get rid of, but we can't break one of our, brand new nozzles. It's metal. I don't know how you break it, but we'll find a way, right? But, that's where the ladders that didn't pass ladder tests go, and the hose that didn't pass hose tests, and the retired apparatus. So, I always thought, I wish I had the New York City budget, but when they get a new apparatus, the very first one off the line goes to the driver training school, so that they can learn how to operate the new apparatus, right? How many people are doing that, or even pumping off apparatus? Most people have pressure governors now. They're operating off an old throttle, which I think is awesome. Bring back the throttle,
yeah,
but
it's cool.
It's not what you're using, right? You don't have the same controls, right? And it's the same with the realistic training. How many people are wearing a different set of gear because they can't afford to wreck their frontline gear, but the pockets are in different places, the material's different, the weight's different. How many people are training with different air packs because we can't afford to break the new one because we added all this crap to them, that we supposedly need to have that made the price go up by 25%. So we can't wreck them. So train with something that you won't use.
Yeah, give them a wireframe.
Yeah, right. And I would love to have that back because it's lighter. But, when the stuff is not in the same place on the shoulders, when the purge is not the same, torque or whatever you want to get down to, again, train how you play, right? But we're not going to give you the resources. And I get why they don't, right? We don't have room in these budgets anymore to just go hastily breaking things. And some of that's on us. And, it's kind of like the instructor conundrum where, if I'm the fire chief and you're in my department and you go teach for Valor fire training, right? Why should I allow you to take the gear that my city bought for you to go be an instructor, right? Now, I think that's kind of crazy because you're doing something for the good of the fire service, but nickels and dime wise, your gear is going to get used up faster than the next guy. So why is that my responsibility when you're teaching 3 states away? And so we go down all these rabbit holes, but they all come back to realism because if you're not using the same stuff you use day in and day out, and that's kind of, to me, the one problematic area of the outside training is that you're at the will of whoever's facility you're at and what they use, right? So if you use MSA air packs and all I have is Scotch, you have to use that. If you use smoothbore nozzles and all I have is a 100 PSI automatic, you're at the will of that, right? So it's still better than not getting any training, but at what point is better than nothing actually not really true, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, and I'm sure, you know, in your training realm, you've kind of seen the same thing, but when we go teach classes and we do hot classes, we want to use their equipment. Like, yeah, we bring our own nozzles when we talk about the difference between fixed gallonage or smooth bore versus automatic. We have a plethora of different equipment that we'll bring out for like show and tell. But when we're doing evolutions, we want them to use their stuff because that's what's the most realistic. We have our own radios. We take them so that the instructors can kind of talk off the grid, because we've had some situations where somebody keys up and says something and they're like, oh, dispatch monitors that. So we have our own radios that we can talk off the grid, and we can kind of say, I mean, within reason, we can kind of say what we want. But we don't have the students use those because they're not their radios. They're not where the channels are set up. They're not how their stuff works. And so I'm not knocking anybody that does that goes and has their own stuff and they have them use the cool new whiz bang gizmo. There's nothing wrong with that. But just understand that muscle memory is going to be different. And I think you're spot on with what you said about just making sure that your realism is going to benefit the firefighter, not only now, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. At that 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, the mom's screaming in the yard that her kids are trapped.
Yeah, and it's a planning thing to me, right? I mean, we know what we didn't know. And if you look at training, I think, you know, again, I've been in the fire service. I'm going on, you know, getting near 20 years now total. So, you know, but I have noticed probably in the past 10, you know, the increase in training in general, especially the outside training, has just been phenomenal, right? And then you couple that with all the knowledge we've gained, the research we've done on cancer and exposure, right, and gear and hose streams and nozzle streams and all these things. It's like, if you look at the past decade, we've probably gained more information in the past decade than we've gained, you know, in the previous, you know, 3, you know, through research and stuff. So now it's like, let's take that research, start planning, right? So we know that every X amount of years, NFPA is going to relook at this thing, right? So our short-term planning is that we need to at least get through to the next NFPA revision, right? But we now know that, hey, we're probably going to need new air packs about every 10 years, whatever it boils down to, right? So let's start buying a few here and there so that they're not all going out at the same time. Let's not plan on buying everybody brand new gear at the same time. And most places are starting to do this, and it's going to take time to catch up. But when you're doing that, let's buy an extra training air pack, right? Let's, you know, it's easy to throw $3,000 in now than to turn around and tell the city that you need $30,000 for 10 training packs, right? And then again, oh, they're all going to go out at the same time again. Same thing with cylinders, same thing with hand tools, right? You know, with the exception of the Halligan bar. If you have an original Halligan bar, don't buy new ones, just put it on the truck, right? But, you know, so but yeah, you should have this stuff so that it's kind of in your training plan now. And I think most places are started that have the means to do it, right? And we could get into the volunteer side, which has a whole different host of problems. And I feel bad because I think a lot of time we talk about everything from the career perspective for those of us that are mainly career. And, you know, it's really not that simple for the volunteer departments a lot of time. Although some of them have better budgets than a lot of the career departments do, but some of them don't.
I was going to say, bro, I went, so Kearney, Nebraska, I'm going to name drop those guys because I know.
Oh, done.
Kearney, Nebraska up there, you know, it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It's a decent sized town there. It's a combination department. They have one full-time firefighter at each station on duty every day, including their airport. And they run a crash rig. They have 3 stations. And, you know, we walked up to their training center. It's a multi-million-dollar training center that they built over time, and it took them a couple of years to build it. But I mean, this thing is insane. It's got a wood shop. It's got a couple different towers that you can burn in. They have one air pack for every seating position on their reserve rigs so that they can, and they're dedicated for training. So they're yeah. And then on top of that, you walk up to the wall in the training building, and it's got a whole wall full of air packs with masks hung on them. And I said, what's up with that? They said, well, when we got the grant, you know, we could only put them on the seats for each apparatus, but we went ahead and bought extras just to have for training. And then we mounted them on the wall. So we have more just so we don't have to take in-service packs out.
That's cool.
And so, yeah, I mean, you know, there's, no matter where you go, whether it's career, volunteer, combination, you're right. I mean, there's so many people that look at it from just a career aspect, but then don't look at it from maybe a volunteer aspect, budgetary or operations or any of that stuff.
Well, and times too, right? You know, it's easy to say that it's hard to do a Class A burn or required structure burn when you have guys that are there for 24 hours that you can literally take out of service and do the whole thing. But when you're trying to get volunteers in, for their 3-hour weekly drill or, training night, whatever you call it, the setup alone, right? Like you would almost have to do it on a weekend, and now you're adding an additional day of training, and, people are already strapped for time. I just started volunteering again about a year ago for a city that's about 20 minutes from me. And, me and the chief, we go way back to the EMS days. We used to work together in a box. So, we have a good relationship. And I'm, yeah, man, I'll be out here all the time. And, I know it's only mandatory 2 days a month, but I'm going to, if I got some free time, I'm struggling to get out there, 2 days a month. And, COVID didn't help because, I had to be home to help with the kids, which was about the time I went out there. But still, like, even now, like, I probably could have gone out there for a couple hours today, but, I got overtime coming up this week, and I'm like, no, I think I'm going to chill. So, I can only, maybe it'd be easier if I lived a little closer, I grew up in that where, it was your hometowns where you volunteered. You didn't have to drive. It was right there. But even so, I mean, there's just so many demands, and, you bring up COVID and the economy and all that. Like, I don't know that people can afford to go to the volunteer firehouse as much as they used to, or even can they afford to go outside training, and they have to be home? Do they have to work a second job right now? I mean, there's just all these factors. And, so how realistic is it to ask them, hey, we're going to do live burn on Thursday night? Well, with all the things we're going to have to do now to make that happen and be safe about it,
it's going to be,
you'll be there at 1 a.m, right? So kind of touchy, I guess. But, something you said that you talk about cardiac that kind of sparks something too is the in-service aspect. And, I know coming up in the volunteer system, it was real easy to take, we had I think 3 or 4 engines in a truck company, right? So you just take everything out of the house, bring it all. And then you have the oldest engine probably is going to be your training engine, and everything else is in service, right? But I know on the career side, what's hard is now I have a district, right? And I can only stay in that district, and I have to be in service a lot of the time when I train. I mean, I can ask permission to come out, and sometimes it's allowed, but the career guys trying to do realistic training and keep the engine in service or the truck company in service is a disaster, and I'll break it down to something very simple as bringing 2 lines off your engine. A house hire, you're going to bring 2 lines off. I am extremely hesitant to take 2 cross lays off my truck because I need something, right? And I have 150 in the bumper, so I have a little more latitude now than I used to. But even so, if I take both 200-foot lines off, right, and I have the ability to build, I've got packs to build, but now I've added time to a process that would have had less time because I was trying to train, and that's all well and good until it delays my fire attack or my response or something, and now I got questions to answer. So is that better than being out of service where I couldn't respond? I don't know. To me, you get into this whole thing again, but how realistic can you be on a shift, with a single company or 2 companies and still have the ability to respond to a call, and you're out there in a parking lot. It's not the best place to do it. There's just this whole gamut of stuff. And I think, what it boils down to for me is that I would argue that if you're out doing something, that is almost always better than nothing. You run the danger of doing it wrong.
Absolutely.
You run the danger of not doing it as realistically, but you're not going to get better sitting in the station. We all know that, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to put your head back in your chair.
Even Frank would agree with that.
Yeah. So I think you just have to be more creative now. And social media gets knocked a lot, and I understand why. But to me, it's all about how you curate your news feed, right? So I have a very simple news feed. It's stupid memes that I probably shouldn't share anyway, and it's fire stuff, right? And it's to family, and I keep the news on there for local stuff, but that's becoming less important to me. So, but I don't have all these issues a lot of people have. Like, you see this, I don't see that crap, right? I see 50 ways to throw your ladder, right? The best way to move your hose line, and somebody's kid, and I should send this a messenger because I don't want to get fired, right? Like, that's what I have. So, but there's so many great resources out there. There's a lot of, vetted good training groups that have a lot of really good ideas, a lot of really smart people from all over the place, from every department, shape, and size, to where they can teach you how to build a box to bring it out on your engine somewhere with some spare hose that everybody has somewhere in their station, right? So you could do hose pulls without even taking a single line off your rig and still have it at the right height, right? All these things. You can do a lot with pallets. You can do, rope stuff. I mean, there's all these things you can do. I mean, I just went to some apartments, and I just, casually walked by the maintenance guy when we got there, and he drove by. I said, "Hey man, everything's cool. Like, we're just kind of playing, trying to try out some hose stretches, so we'll be prepared to come here." And he's like, "Cool, bro, rock on, whatever." So, get out in your district. You don't need, like you said, a multi-million-dollar training building is great, but what's better than the actual buildings that you're going to run on, right? And I get it. It's dicey sometimes, and not everybody is that accommodating. I think if you use some common sense, you watch your behavior and you're polite about questions that are asked, you'll be fine. It's when you're standoffish, you're out there cussing like sailors and roughhousing, right? And you know, pointing at women that you're going to get in trouble, man. And you laugh, but this is why people get in trouble trying to do it, right? So
no, you're absolutely right. Like one of the funniest stories I've ever heard. Well, I've heard a lot of funny stories, but the funniest one that I've heard lately in regards to that was Howard Reinwald from FD Tactics. He was talking about getting a phone call at his office, and this lady was irate. She wanted to file a complaint. She wanted to talk to the fire chief. And so he takes this phone call, and this lady says, yeah, I'm sitting at work, and I look on my phone, and on my Ring doorbell, I see this fire truck pull up with the lights on, and the firefighters come running up in my front yard, and I thought my house was on fire, and then I find out later that they're just doing training. And so, you know, it's one of those things you would never think of, but like in today's day and age, you know, Ring doorbells or Nest doorbells.
Yeah,
you're going to freak people out if you start pulling up to their house and throwing ladders, or, you know, so you got to communicate.
it's tough. I've learned that I think the private residential dwelling is not going to have the latitude that maybe a commercialized residential dwelling has, right? And you know, let's be honest. I mean, I think the bulk of what you would want to do on a single family dwelling, you could probably accomplish at your station fairly realistically. It's the apartments with the stairs, right, or the interior stairwells or standpipes that you get, the parking decks and stuff like that. That's, to me, you know, the commercial size building. That's where you need to get out. Like most stuff, single family, you know.
I'll give him A for effort, though. I mean,
I think it's great. I mean, if I pulled up there and do that to my house, I'd be like, rock on, right? But I'm a fireman, so like, I can understand why she freaked out, you know. And again, if you break something, now you got a problem. But yeah, again, you got to find ways to make it realistic. And you know, I think if we're focusing our training understanding only on the burn buildings, only on our ability to do live fire, like I think that's a critical aspect of it. But you know, it's kind of like sports. So I can go to the batting cage, right? I can get amazing at hitting, you know, just by doing the batting cage. Is it the same as being in a game and having somebody throw to me? Not a chance. But how do the athletes train, right? The same way. And this is where I laugh at social media, because you get, you know, kind of like Engine Company Resurrection, right? Kyle, he's always getting these haters about, oh, well, you know, you're not realistic. You weren't breathing air and having all your gear on. It's like, man, nobody practices full pads all day, every day. Like at some point, you got to like
the fact that the dude just knee walked all the way up a flight.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it doesn't count because he didn't have his air pack on, right? That's his thing, right? And I think it's funny. It's so funny what people lash onto as far as, you know, just trying to be, you know, oh, well, blah, 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 you know? So, but yeah, you know, I think as long as you're doing the repetition a lot, you're focusing like weightlifting, right? Or exercise, you're focus on the form, right? You know, the speed will come later, you know, get out there as a crew, make your mistakes together, critique each other, be honest with each other. That to me is the most realistic training you can get. Now, if you can fit a live burn in once a year, rock on. I think that's awesome. I think it should be mandated personally.
Me too.
I think every state, to be a firefighter, you should have to be guaranteed to see at least one fire a year, even if it's in training. That's just my aspect. So, but yeah, so, you know, I don't know, man. I think it's what you make of it a lot of the time. And we could sit here for probably another hour and talk about all the horrible things that prevent us from doing these things, or we could just go out and find solutions. And that's, to me, to fix the fire service, that's what we need more of. You know, you don't have enough realism in your training. Hey, I hate that. But, you know, work the formal angle with your chief and your training officers and your district or whatever, and get the money for it. But then work the other angle where, all right, fellas, let's pool our resources together. Who's got some pallets, right? Yeah. Who knows how to build stuff? Who can fabricate metal? Let's, you know, this isn't ideal, but this is better than what we had. And maybe, just maybe, if you show a little ingenuity, which again, I get it, you shouldn't have to invest time and money into doing it, but let's be honest, this is not Walmart. So not to knock Walmart, but this is not Walmart. So if you came into the fire service not expecting to do that, you were misinformed, in my humble opinion. So kind of what you're going through, right? Why not get back to the days where, I can't remember who does this. I want to say I don't think it's Seattle. It's somewhere in California or the Pacific Northwest. But anyway, and you might think of what I say, but in their recruit class, they build a house to learn building construction, right? So, you know, I don't know how to build a house, but I'm sure some people in my department do. So if we need a training tower, why not buy the lumber and let's teach everybody about building construction while we build ourselves a tower? Yeah. That's how it used to be. If you want to go back to the roots, right? That's how the volunteer departments were, back in the old days. So
So I know that there's a lot of departments that do that, but the one that actually stands out in my mind is Edmond, Oklahoma.
yes, is that Brush?
So Brush, yeah.
Yeah. So I knew it was out west somewhere, right?
It's out west for you. I mean, it's just south for me. But
There you go, right? Perspective.
when we went and did a class down in Edmond, and super great group of people. I mean, just good people, good department. It's just a little bit north of Oklahoma City. And they had a concrete pad with all the bolts sticking out. And I was like, man, what's that pad for? And they kind of joked. They were like, yeah, we build a house every year and then burn it down. And I was like, oh, that's funny. Ha ha. And they're like, no, seriously, we have our recruits build a house. And I'm like a real house. And they're like, oh yeah, first floor, second floor, I was like, okay. So it was cool to see the pictures that Brush put up there that, it was how they build it, and they learn the building construction. They learn about different support structures. And it's something that doesn't happen a whole lot.
And teamwork, right? And all these things we're so like, we're trying to find all these amazing ways to unite people and motivate them and make them work as a team. And here's a extremely simple exercise that checks like 45 boxes off the make people care thing. Yeah. And, why are we not all doing it? I don't know. Maybe I need to throw that out in my department. Hey, we don't have recruits coming through like that, but hey, we could all go out there for the year, and I think it would be kind of hard to burn it down in the middle of the city. I think the city would frown upon that with the no burn ordinance. But
I'm pretty sure, like, if we did it at my department, I'd be the dude standing there with like the tape measure. I'd be like, this is the only thing I'm good at. I don't know.
Yeah. I can run a nail gun and I can sort of cut things right most times, but
Yeah, no, I mean, it's cool. And you definitely drive that point home. But yeah, so I think, getting back to just kind of wrap it up. So like the question that Frank posed, how do we feel about realistic training? I think we all agree that it's of the utmost importance. I think that whether or not you can do live fire, or if you're restricted to doing, Class B or some other type of fire that isn't Class A, you can still find ways to augment that and make it more realistic. I think that moving forward, as we start growing as a fire service, I mean, we've kind of hit this, I don't want to say a lull, but I mean, especially with COVID, the training just stopped. I mean, there was a lot of departments that just stopped training altogether. And so I almost feel like it's kind of a reset for the fire service. And so as we move now back into opening up, hopefully in the near future, that, we'll start seeing some departments investing in making some more realistic training. So,
yeah, I would like to see a lot of the non-hands off stuff go this route, right? Like, I think it would be more advantageous for the fire service as a whole to the conferences are still good. You still got to have classroom tracks, right? But as far as like fire academy type stuff, like if we could do this virtually and save the resources and the facilities at the fire academies for the hands-on stuff, to me, that's a win-win, right? And I don't want to see people get into Zoom as their main method, right? But, there are certain classes where, me and you sitting across from the table from each other versus a screen from each other is the same thing. So if that would get people more interactively or more involved or active, I guess, better word, in taking those classes, why not seek that route? And now you have all this extra, people and, facilities to maybe start bringing back those live fire classes. So, again, like everything, right? You got to use the tools and, like you said, augment what you got. Hopefully this has taught us, that Zoom can be a part of that, or not the name brand, virtual meetings could be a part of that.
No, right? I mean, it's cool. We're on a Zoom, so you can use Zoom.
I'm not endorsed by Zoom or its sponsorships, right? But yeah, even the Class A burns, right? Like, kind of like we said, if you're burning pallets, like, don't settle for that if it doesn't put out the smoke you want. Find a way to either get a smoke machine or a burn baler, and if you're one of those lucky areas that is allowed to burn structures, take advantage, because there's hundreds others that are foaming at the mouth to do it that aren't allowed to for any variety of reasons. So, count your blessings there. So, absolutely. But yeah, no, cool question, man. I appreciate you having me. I hope we didn't get, too far down rabbit holes off the beaten path there.
Listen, man, if anybody watching this video after we post it has made it this far, thank you. And for all the ones that just skip to the end, you missed like the really good parts in the middle. You got to go back and watch.
Yeah, that's right.
But now, Mark, I can't thank you enough for being on here. Everybody watching, check out The Fire Inside, which you're on Facebook, Instagram. What else?
Website, www.thefireinsidepage.com. So those are. That's too much if you ask me. I get people it. Say, get on Instagram. I don't know how to use it.
I don't either. I
don't get it, but whatever.
I get it. Somebody was like, you got to put hashtags. I'm like, for what?
I figured that out. What I can't figure out now is how to repost. It doesn't work for me, so I just go on Facebook. But whatever.
Oh yeah, but no, check out the Fire Inside. Always have good stuff on there. I love watching it on social media. Check out our page, Valor Fire Training, if you get a chance. And we look forward to the next question coming up. Mark, until the next time we talk, enjoy the quarantine. Stay safe and keep washing your hands.
You too, bro. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, man. Take care.
See you later.